Today we are talking about a very hot topic, something I talk to many people who are converting or interested about health and nutrition, and that is salt, sodium, high blood pressure, and strokes.
Right. It's a good subject. People have to learn about this.
So Dr. Fuhrman, honestly, people get really touchy about salt and sodium because I was doing a lot of research for this episode, and it seems like it's a really big part of culture and even ancient civilizations, which we hear about a lot.
Right.
Which is fascinating. So from my research, basically, I learned that people have been adding salt to their meat and stuff and curating that stuff and adding salt to people's diets. Humans have been doing that for over 5,000 years.
Wow, 5,000 years.
Which sounds like, here's the disclaimer, sounds like a very, very long time. Ancient civilizations. However, when you look at the entire history of humans on the planet Earth, we've been around for 5 million years about.
Wow. Or even 100,000 years, whatever it is. It's like
they're saying
5,000 years is irrelevant
yes,
compared to the genetic change of the human species.
Right. So when you think about us doing it in ancient times, you're like, whoa, but then you realize humans have not been doing that very long at all in retrospect.
That's right. For 999% of human existence, there's been no added sodium to the human diet. And then before that, you have primitive man and then other primates that do not salt their food.
Right. So just to throw it back to
and by the way,
history.
can I just interrupt that for a second?
Sure.
Because just because there have been populations that have salted their food for thousands of years, there's also been many populations around the world and around the earth that haven't salted their food at all. Even today, there are populations and primitive populations living all over the world that never use salt in their food. And we can track the outcome of those populations and see what happens.
And what happened?
They're all dead. No, I'm just kidding. They all died when they were 20 years old.
So what happened, Doc?
Well, one thing people think about is they know that salt eating raises blood pressure, right?
No, I don't think people know that, actually.
Oh. Well, one of the factors in which salt increases risk of heart attack death and stroke death is the fact that it raises blood pressure, and the high blood pressure then accelerates risk of both heart attack and strokes. That's one mechanism via which salt shortens lifespan.
Wait, I just want to comment on this fact. And when I was researching, I mean, I know what you've been telling me since I was a wee lad about salt and sodium, and it hasn't been a big part of my diet. However, when I was researching this, I was looking at people add salt. I mean, salt shakers are such a big thing before they even try their food. It's such a part of our culture, but it is pretty unanimously, the evidence is so clear when I'm not just from you, but from other physicians, from research articles that I was looking at, salt for sure raises blood pressure a lot.
Yes. However, I mean, we went into two questions. First, you asked me what happened to those primitive population, which I'll get to. I'm not going to remember that question.
Yeah.
And the fact that we're talking about salt raises blood pressure. But we know that blood pressure raising means that you're having damage to the endothelial lining of blood vessels. You're damaging and aging your body prematurely.
Because you're pushing on them, like the extra pressure?
Oh, well, it's not just extra pressure. And salt damages and ages blood pressure and ages brain cells, irrespective of its effect on raising blood pressure. When you're raising blood pressure, yes, you're resulting in more stiffening of the blood vessels. Salt does cause microvascular hemorrhages, and it irritates the endothelium. It also increases inflammation in the endothelial lining, decreasing nitric oxide production and creating more reactive oxygen species, which is the cause of most chronic disease, is a buildup of more reactive oxygen species, more free radicals. So salt accelerates aging of the body and aging of the brain, and it actually damages brain cells. So it damages the blood vessels in the brain, leading to this cerebral microvascular damage, increasing risk of dementia before a person has a stroke or dies. So there's lots of different mechanisms via which salt accelerates aging of the body. And the question about salt in primitive populations, we find that in populations that don't salt their food at all, like tribes living in the Amazon jungle in the northern part of Brazil and southern part of Venezuela, these people have lived for centuries and centuries where they never added salt to their food. And they find that the blood pressure of children is the same as the blood pressure of the most elderly members of those communities. And that compared to other tribes that have been exposed to humans who salt their food and start to salt their food, we see the blood pressure raise in children and start to go up. So we're seeing that populations that salt their food are seeing damage to the endothelial lining and to the blood vessels starting in childhood. The damage starts right away when you salt your food.
Wow.
And the risk of having a cardiovascular death or a stroke death caused by sodium intake is related to your lifetime exposure to sodium. Most correlates best with your lifetime exposure to sodium. That means even the sodium you consumed as a child has an effect on contributing to your heart attack death or your stroke death when you're 70 or 80 or 90 years old.
You always said it's what we do in our youth and as children that it really actually do still impact us and greatly impact us down the road.
Right, and
So
all children at the age of 10 years of age in the Western countries, the United States, have blood pressures that are excessively high, even though they're not considered high blood pressure, but they're still higher. The tribe I'm talking about, I have written down right here, is called the Yanomamo Indian tribe, and the average blood pressure of the population, the same average blood pressure in children is the same average blood pressure in the 60 and 70-year-olds in the population, which is 95/63 is their average blood pressure. Now you look at average blood pressures of 10-year-olds in the United States, and their average blood pressure will be 100, 110, 120, will be higher than that. It won't be 95 or 90 or 90.
Right.
So we're seeing, and this is why some people can claim, oh, salt eating doesn't matter, is because they're looking at salt eating in the last 5 years of life, where the person just had 55, 65, 70 years of having too much salt, and then because they develop high blood pressure, then their doctor tells them to cut back on salt, and it may not have the largest effect at reducing cardiovascular death because they've been on a high salt diet for 70 years already.
So we went through this because it's like their pack years, because it's what you do over the course of your entire life that is really impacting you down the road.
That's right. Same thing with pack years, and same thing with DHA deficiency. Why people will argue, oh, it's not going to help you. They could show a study where people are taking DHA for a year or two. Well, they waited till they were 75, 80 years old, and the brain shrinkage starts from DHA deficiency when you're in your 30s and 40s.
Right.
When you first start to get memory loss at age 65, you already got shrunk brain cells for 20, 30 years.
Right.
So it's the lifetime exposure. In other words, the sooner you fix this, the better. You can't wait till you have advanced damage. And this is why people are confused about the science.
Well, it's so confusing too, because let's go back to ancient civilizations. Right. There was good in salting their food because it preserved meat. It allowed them to feed villages and get away with that stuff, right? But what I was also researching is the diets then did not have any processed food. So if you look at, they're like, okay, it was a little bit of added sodium. When you talk about what processed food and how much added sodium, salt, and garbage is in our stuff, we're now becoming, the salt in our diet is about 80 times what adding a little salt to preserving meat would do.
Well, yeah, but they're still not ideal diets they were eating back then.
Yeah,
right. We have the science today to make diets that are so we can live to be 97 to 107 years old and not have to worry about strokes and heart attacks. Why not do it better than their ancestors could have done?
Totally. But even so, if you think, oh, it's so great, our ancestors salt, there's so much misinformation around salt. You think that your body needs it and you'll be peeing all the time without it, or that you'll lose all your fluids. I see questions all the time about people with salt because they're scared to have a diet without excess salt. And I just want to be really clear, when we talk about salt, you're not saying all sodium is dangerous. There's sodium in naturally occurring food. We're talking about excess added salt to our food.
Right. Just like we have sugar in fruit, there's sodium, and the amount of sodium humans need in fruits and vegetables and beans and nuts contains sodium, but they all have less than 0.5 milligram of sodium per calorie. So if you eat 1,000 calories, you're getting less than 500 milligrams of sodium. If you eat 2,000 calories, you're getting less than 800 milligrams of sodium. It's always less than 0.5 milligram of sodium per calorie. So natural foods have low amounts of sodium. That's the amount that the human body needs. It's the sodium that we're consuming over and above what food gives us, what natural foods give us, that causes disease.
Right.
And let's just look at this for 1 second, because the American Heart Association and the American College of Cardiology recommends that people with heart disease and high blood pressure cut their sodium back to 1,500 milligrams a day maximum, which includes what's in food and the excess they add.
Okay,
and
so
I'm
total.
Saying, right, the total is 1,500 milligrams. And I have to say 2 things about that. Number 1, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life.
What?
That's like telling a person with lung cancer to cut back on smoking. You got lung cancer, you shouldn't smoke.
Mm-hmm.
If smoking causes lung cancer, then nobody should smoke, and they should stop smoking as children, not wait till they get lung cancer, tell them to quit.
Right.
If sodium is bad for people with heart patients, then they should stop it as children and not wait till they get heart disease to stop their sodium. The whole thing is the stupidest thing, because the time they're stopping the sodium, you already have heart disease. And that heart disease took 30, 40, 50 years to be caused by a high sodium diet. So number one,
I have a question. You're saying they only recommend 1,500 milligrams for heart disease patients, but everyone else, they're like, oh,
they don't have any instructions to anybody else. But when you have heart disease, cut back to 1,500 milligrams. The whole thing is ridiculous. Plus, the studies show that as you go from 3,000 to 2,000, all the way down to 1,000, you see cardiovascular deaths and stroke deaths diminish. Well, cardiovascular death really includes stroke deaths because it's a form of cardiovascular disease. But in any case, you see diminishing in deaths as people cut back from 2,000 to 1,500 to 1,000. They arbitrarily chose 1,500 because they thought that's what Americans or the people they're advising might be able to do. They thought if they gave them the ideal, which is 1,000 or below, then people wouldn't be able to do it.
Because going back to what I was researching on the internet, you know, you're like one of the only people that says like, hey, watch your sodium intake. We shouldn't be adding it to everything. And it's everywhere.
You shouldn't be adding it to anything.
To anything, right. And it's in everything. But so I'm looking on the internet and like the research is everywhere. It's like lower salt intake, lower cardiovascular deaths. Right. So I'm like, why did people not talk about this? It blows my mind.
Yeah. Well, you know, people who are addicts and people who want to eat meat will show studies that eating meat doesn't really lead to much increased death. And they can prove the study with that because they're comparing meat eating to people who eat less red meat now eat more chicken. And because switching from meat to chicken doesn't decrease stress, look, red meat is okay. They switch to, or eggs are not bad because they had less eggs and they had more processed white flour carbohydrates and didn't reduce risk of death. The whole thing is ridiculous. They can always find a study to convince this person that wants to eat meat or wants to eat sodium or wants to have ice cream or wants to do anything they want or wants to continue smoking cigarettes. We could always have some group of people is going to try to find some data to advocate.
Not that bad.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But if you have a scientific viewpoint and want to collect all the data available and not just pick the data to support a viewpoint, then you can't deny the comprehensive major effect that sodium has on major deaths. And let me just say, the World Health Organization put together 150 scientists to look at the issue, and they're not scientists connected with the sodium industry or the anti-sodium industry, and let's just see what they found. This was a study published in 2023, March 9th of 2023. They advocated that all UN-associated countries dramatically reduce their sodium intake by 30% by 2025 to save 7 million lives, and that the Global Burden of Disease study in 2019 showed that about 22% of all deaths worldwide can be attributed to bad diet and predominantly high sodium intake.
One of the
major. So we're talking about many millions of people dying each year, millions and millions of people dying each year from sodium intake, while there are people advocating people should that it's not going to make a difference. But
I'm
saying the preponderance of evidence and all the corroborating evidence and the overall conclusion of scientists who look at this question as a full-time job all understand the necessity for people to avoid added sodium on their food.
For sure. And that's what I was so surprised, like just hearing you say it my whole life and not really seeing it like on the internet and other places. When I'm researching the science, I'm like, oh, it's so obvious. It's very in your face. This should be widely accepted. And then it goes back to what I was looking at as well. Wait. You reminded me of something that I wanted to bring up. Sodium. Okay. This was it. See, I held my thought. You hear that sugar has like all these addictive properties and like can rewire your brain and is super addictive. But what all of these articles were also saying was that sodium and excess salt is super addictive. So that kids who have salt very early in life, like it just keeps piling up. It's a super addictive substance as well. Crazy.
It's super addictive. And how many people know that sodium causes obesity?
And alters your taste buds.
Alters your taste buds, deadens your taste sensation, makes you require more sodium, but it leads to more fat deposition, more body weight, and more desire to overeat calories. Salt is a major factor stimulating the apostat, and salt is a major factor letting the body hold more fat to dilute the inflammation caused by the extra sodium. So just like we're talking about poisons and pesticides and chemicals causing people to gain weight, sodium causes weight gain in the same way, making the body retain more fat.
Wow.
And also this person who's acclimated to a high sodium diet, they're pushing out sodium all the time through their sweat, through their breathing, and through their urine. They have to.
What about tears? Is that true too?
Yes, and through their tears. But tears not a major source of sodium loss. But in any case, when the body has to excrete all the excess sodium consumed, it doesn't just isolated take out the extra sodium. It removes other minerals in the process and other nutrients in the process.
Oh, so you're like losing nutrients?
You're losing nutrients. You're losing minerals all the time.
So salt's taking out more with it, essentially.
Of course. So if you're, let's say, an athlete who eats a lot of salt, your legs are going to cramp up when you sweat. And you're going to, because when you're losing your sodium, you lose all your potassium, you lose magnesium, you lose silicone, manganese, you're going to lose a lot of chromium, you're going to lose other minerals that go out with the extra sodium you're getting rid of. And you're going to have to think about taking electrolyte replacement drinks. But when you're not on a low salt diet, you don't produce salt in your sweat and you don't produce salt in your urine. Your body is great at it's trained to hold on to sodium, to maintain our body's sodium stable. So now I can exercise, run a marathon, bike in the heat, play a tennis match, go on for hours sweating, and I'm not going to drop my sodium. My legs are not going to cramp up, and you're not going to, and you're just going to have to replace water. You don't have to replace salt and electrolytes because we're not losing salt and electrolytes because our body has acclimated favorably to a lower sodium diet.
Wow. So you're saying once we keep having all this sodium, it's going to cause us to sweat out the sodium more and take more minerals and stuff that we want to save when we're working out.
And we want to save those minerals for good health.
Right.
It increases it strips the body of nutrients, just like sugar strips the body of B vitamins, and sodium strips the body of minerals.
So is there ever, I've seen patients of yours be super concerned when you're like, you need to cut out the excess salt, and they're nervous. Like, why are they so nervous? Do you know why?
Well, it's highly addicting. It's they come here for us to help them, and they're salt addicts, like sugar addicts. And the way to get over their salt addiction is to get them off salt so they can have their taste muscle return and come back. And over time, which usually takes a week of feeling fatigue from their salt withdrawal. And don't forget, when they first come in here, we're giving them no extra sodium in their diet. Now, they're used to being on a high sodium diet, right?
Right. We're talking like potentially thousands of milligrams a day. Like,
right.
I turn over some packages at Whole Foods, like ramen or like healthy pho, and I look, or just veggie broth even, and I'll look at it and I'm like, 980 milligrams, whole day right there. And that's just excess. That's not even in the other foods we eat.
Right. So let's say they're consuming 3,000 or 4,000 milligrams of sodium, and now they're coming here and they're eating, and what's in the food is 700 milligrams.
Right.
So they went from 3,000 to 1,000, let's say.
Yeah.
Okay. Their body is still putting a lot of sodium out in the urine. It didn't suddenly fix the kidney and fix the sweat.
Every time.
Right?
Every time. They're sweating.
Okay, but anyway, so they're going to be, their body sodium is going to go down to a level that's going to cause them more fatigue. So when they switch, they're going to feel uncomfortable as they first acclimate to a low sodium intake.
Like they're detoxing from anything.
Like detox.
Yeah.
But it's really that their body is still not taking in sodium and they're losing excess sodium, so they're temporarily becoming hyponatremic. Their body level of sodium in their blood is temporarily dipping until their kidney learns to hold on to sodium better. So they'll become more fatigued while they acclimate to the lower sodium intake and thinking they're feeling too tired, they need more sodium, their blood pressure's going, too low or whatever it is. So
because they're retraining their body to behave differently? They're retraining
the body to acclimate to a lower sodium intake. Wow. And then by week 2, they're starting to feel better. The fatigue is going away. But by week 3, over time, the body will acclimate to a lower sodium intake and the kidneys will stop releasing so much electrolytes. So it's part of the detox process. And it's one of the reasons people feel the addictive sensation of trying to come off sodium.
Yeah. It's crazy. I mean, as someone that grew up not eating a ton of excess sodium, whenever I eat at a restaurant, I am kept up at night because my mouth is so dry and I'm just like a water machine. Like I need to be pumping water into my mouth. And I know if the food was highly salted because my body starts like reacting so different. If you listen to your body, it's so sensitive.
Well, people who regularly eat sodium all the time don't get super thirsty like that because they're used to, it should be you and I, because we're not generally eating a lot of sodium. Well, if we had something with a lot of sodium, then our body wouldn't be excreting it as easily. Just like the person who comes in from a high sodium diet, they're pouring out huge amounts of sodium in their urine, and we're not putting out sodium in our urine or our sweat. So when we
don't
eat
have the tolerance,
right? We can't tolerate it. When we have a high sodium intake, we're like, wow, I got to drink water all night long, and I can't sleep the whole night.
Let me tell you, my body's like reject. Don't do that. And I'm like, I would love to eat at a restaurant that doesn't do this to me. It would be very pleasant.
So this is an important concept that people have to get, that aging does not raise blood pressure. It's the years you're on salt that raises the blood pressure.
Wow. People do not think like
Blood
that.
pressure is not associated with aging. It's associated with years, salt years, how many years you're eating excess sodium.
Right.
And salt years means, do we know what salt years means? It means if 1,000 is acceptable, then how many thousands did you consume over your 1,000 baseline for how many years?
Right.
If you had 3,000 of sodium a day, that's 2,000 above the 1,000 on the baseline. So that's 2,000 times how many years? 20 years? That's 80 salt years. Mm-hmm. If you had 3,000 a day, or if you had 4,000 a day, that's 3,000 above the 1,000 times 30 years. That's 90 salt years. And your risk of having a hemorrhagic stroke or a cardiovascular death is related to those salt years added up through your whole life.
When you're talking about salt years, it's like exponential growth, because these little changes, whether it's like 1,000 or 2,000, you think it's not little day to day, but then as you add it up over 50 or 60 years, it's double.
Don't forget, just to emphasize this, your taste buds get stronger when you're off salt, and you enjoy food more, not less. You're not taking the taste out of food. Now, artichoke's going to be more flavor. Lettuce is going to have more flavor. Everything you eat is going to be more flavorful because your taste buds get stronger, not weaker.
And I've read research that backs you up on that. Mm-hmm. So I've taken other people's word for it too.